silence is not always empty. Sometimes it is where the most authentic melodies are created. Olivia had lost all hope until a strange man appeared. He knelt before her son, gently raising the boy's chin. Then, with a finger placed lightly on his lips, he whispered a question so small it seemed to dissolve into the wind. The boy's eyes suddenly widened. The single word he uttered afterward left Olivia completely stunned. Outside the 45th floor glass window, the incessant chirping of cicadas created a misplaced summer symphony amidst the frigid, air-conditioned space. Inside, all that remained was the soft scratching of a Mont Blanc pen on expensive contract paper. This was Elena, CEO of Melodia Tech, and she had just placed the final, decisive period. The ink was a sharp, inky black, much like herself at this moment, precise, powerful, and leaving no room for weakness. "Congratulations, Miss." Vance, the man opposite her, an investor from Silicon Valley, smiled and extended his hand. "A $50 million deal. Your perfect pitch AI will change the music industry." Elena shook his hand, her grip firm and confident. The diamond ring on her ring finger flashed a cold light under the LED bulbs. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Melodia Tech never disappoints." Her smile was perfectly measured, friendly enough for a good relationship, but distant enough to maintain her authority. The meeting ended. The room was empty, leaving only Elena and the familiar silence. She looked out the window at the city sprawling below, like a giant electronic circuit board where everything was connected and operated with perfect logic. Her world was one of numbers, growth charts, and flawless lines of code, a world she could control. But a few hours later, that world vanished. The city's Central Park was a different world entirely, a chaotic symphony of sounds and colors. Children were laughing and shouting, birds were singing, and balls bounced on the grass. Elena sat on a cold wooden bench, her hand clutching her phone, which was constantly buzzing with work notifications from Slack and email. She ignored them all. Elena had brought her son, Leo, to the playground out of desperation. Her gaze was fixed on a small figure standing motionless near the fountain. Leo, her son. The 6-year-old boy had large, clear eyes like two glass marbles, but they were frighteningly empty. His chestnut brown hair fell over his stubborn forehead. He did not run, jump, or laugh. He simply existed in the vibrant scene, like a small, silent statue. Leo's small hand gripped the swing chain tightly. His eyes followed the other children, but he never joined them. Elena sat on a nearby bench. Her phone was in her hand, but she was not looking at it, pretending not to be watching the crowd for pitying glances. 1 year. 365 days had passed since the accident. 365 days since Leo's voice was stolen, along with the life of David, her husband. The doctors diagnosed him with selective mutism due to psychological trauma. They said he needed time. But for Elena, each silent day was an invisible knife, cutting deeper into a wound that had never healed. The crisp laughter of other children echoed around her like sharp shards of glass, piercing the heavy stillness that enveloped mother and son. A wave of despair washed over Elena. She had built a technology empire from nothing, managed hundreds of employees, and convinced the most difficult investors, yet she was powerless against her own son's silence. She could create an AI that composed a perfect symphony, but she could not make her son say, "Mom." Just as she felt herself about to break, a strange sound broke through the air. It was not a beautiful melody, but one coming from an old, faded harmonica held by a man on the opposite bench. The man looked to be in his 40s, dressed in a worn shirt and faded jeans. His hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a tired, melancholic look in his eyes. The notes he played did not try to be perfect. They were broken, wobbly, and sometimes off-key. There were unusual pauses between the notes, as if the player was hesitating, or as if the harmonica itself carried some sorrow. It was unlike any music Elena had ever heard. It was like a clumsy confession, heartbreakingly authentic. Elena frowned, feeling slightly annoyed at the intrusion on her quiet space. But then, she noticed a small, unexpected change. Leo's shoulders twitched. His eyes, which had been staring into a void, now began to focus. He slowly turned his head toward the source of the sound. He was listening. Elena's heart skipped a beat. For an entire year, she had played Leo the most perfect classical music, scientifically proven therapeutic sounds, but all had been in vain. Yet now, these imperfect notes were capturing his attention. The man, seemingly unaware he had an audience, continued to play. He improvised, following no rules. He created long pauses, not trying to fill the silence with sound. He seemed to be having a conversation with the silence itself. And then, a miracle happened. Leo, her silent son, slowly turned his entire body around. He stared intently at the stranger, his big eyes shining with a raw curiosity Elena had not seen in a very long time. He took one small step at a time, moving toward the sound. Elena held her breath, afraid that even a small movement from her would shatter this fragile moment. The man blew the last 3 notes, one high, one low, and one lingering in the air. He ended the melody with a long pause, like an unanswered question. In that silence, between the rustling wind and the trickling water, a faint, almost inaudible sound rang out. Missing. Elena was stunned. She could not believe her ears. The sound came from Leo's own lips. She had waited, prayed, and dreamed of this moment for 365 days and nights. She thought the first word she would hear again would be Mom or Dad. But no, it was a subtle observation, almost a critique of the music. Tears began to pour from the corners of Elena's eyes, hot and uncontrollable. They were tears of happiness, of release, washing away the despair she had suppressed for a long, endless year. The man looked up, surprised to see the boy standing in front of him. He looked at Leo, then at Elena, his eyes filled with confusion and a hint of empathy. Leo blinked at him, as if considering his words. His small hand tightened its grip on the swing chain. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice only a little louder than before. Elena's throat tightened so much she could barely breathe. The man smiled faintly. "My name is David." Leo glanced at David, then back at him. His lips moved again, hesitantly, as if the words had to crawl out, but he managed to say, "I am Leo." David's smile widened, and Elena noticed his eyes soften, as if this moment meant something to him too. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Leo," he said. "Now, can I tell you a secret about this playground?" Leo just nodded slightly. David leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The best slide is not the big one over there. It's the small one behind the sandbox. It's faster because the sun warms it up." Leo's eyebrows rose in curiosity. Elena realized it had been years since she had seen that expression on her son's face, pure, unguarded fascination. "Want to try?" David asked. Leo hesitated, then glanced at Elena. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat and tried to nod. "Go ahead, honey." David did not take the boy's hand or lead him like he was a fragile object. He simply walked beside him, letting the boy decide the pace. Leo followed, his steps cautious but determined. Elena stood on the bench for a moment, watching them disappear behind the sandbox, their faint laughter echoing back to her. She realized her hands were trembling, not just because Leo had spoken, but because this man had reached the boy so easily, without pressure or pity, and Elena had no idea who he was. When they returned a few minutes later, Leo was smiling, truly smiling. He climbed back onto the swing, his cheeks flushed. David stayed a little longer, leaning toward Elena. "That boy has a lot to say," he said softly. "He just needs someone to ask the right way." Elena found her voice. "How did you do that?" He shrugged slightly, but there was something in his eyes, a shadow of a story he was not yet ready to share. Sometimes kindness is the only language people understand. Then he began to walk away. Elena was stunned, trying to process what had just happened. She watched his retreating back, his messy hair, and his faded shirt. Every cell in her body screamed at her to ask for his name, address, phone number, anything, but she could not. She was too shocked, too overwhelmed by the sudden happiness and relief. Her mouth was dry, her throat tight. By the time she had composed herself, David had disappeared behind the trees, leaving a vast emptiness in the park. That day, in the noisy park, a broken melody had mended a piece of a broken soul, and Elena knew she had to find out who this man was. After several days of searching in vain, she suddenly remembered his last words. "Sometimes kindness is the only language people understand." The words echoed in her head. David was not a person who lived in a world of numbers and algorithms. He was a person of emotions, of authentic moments. Elena decided not to search for him anymore, but to wait. She believed fate would bring them together again, and she was right. A week later, as she was working at her usual coffee shop, the Mended Note, nestled in a small alley, a complete contrast to the cold, sterile space of Elena's office. The atmosphere here was cozy, with the scent of roasted coffee, old wood, and a very distinctive scent of rosin for violin bows. Old violins and cellos hung on the walls like works of art, each scratch on their bodies telling a story. The shop's mellow music was suddenly broken by a strange sound. It was not a perfect melody, but it was strangely familiar. Elena turned her head and immediately saw Adam, the harmonica player, carefully using a small knife to reshape the bridge of a viola. He worked with concentration and gentleness, his long, slender fingers moving with expertise. "Thank you," Elena said, breaking the silence. She sat opposite him, an untouched latte in front of her. For the miracle you performed for Leo." Adam looked up, his eyes a deep brown. He put down his tool and wiped his hands on a leather apron. "I did nothing, miss. The music did." He smiled faintly, a somewhat shy smile. Sometimes, children like Leo do not need someone to speak for them. They just need a blank space to fill themselves, and sometimes imperfection is exactly what we need. That statement touched a deep part of Elena. She, who had always pursued perfection in everything, for the first time realized the beauty of flaws. A blank space. "I have never thought of it that way. I was always trying to fill his silence with everything. Experts, therapy, classical music. Perfect music sometimes creates pressure," Adam said, his voice deep and warm. "It leaves no room for messy emotions. As for my notes, they have a lot of blank space." Their conversation flowed naturally. Adam did not ask about Leo's circumstances, and Elena did not feel the need to explain. They just talked about music, silence, and the invisible cracks in life. Unconsciously, Adam reached up to run his hand through his disheveled hair, and that's when Elena saw it, a long, white scar running along the back of his right hand. A vague image suddenly flashed in Elena's mind. The blaring sound of an ambulance siren, the acrid smell of gas and smoke, the broken glass fragments shimmering like diamonds under the streetlights, and a hand, a bloody hand, trying to smash the window of a crumpled car. "Your scar," she blurted out, her voice unsteady. Adam flinched, quickly pulling his hand back and hiding it under the table. "Oh, just an old accident." He changed the subject, his gaze shifting away. The sudden change in his demeanor made Elena even more suspicious. A cold sensation ran down her spine. That night, Elena could not sleep. The image of the scar and the vague memory of the accident spun in her head. She got up and opened her laptop. With the determination of a CEO, she began to search. She went back through old articles, news reports from a year ago, information she had not had the courage to read carefully before. She scrolled through dozens of articles, the emotionless headlines: "Tragic accident on the highway, CEO David Vance passes away." Her heart ached, but she forced herself to continue. And then, she stopped at a less-noticed article on a local news site. It contained a small detail that all the major newspapers had missed. Witnesses reported that an anonymous bystander attempted to break the car window to rescue the victim before firefighters arrived. The person was quite severely injured on their hand from the broken glass, and left the scene before police could take a statement. Elena's heart stopped. Anonymous bystander, injured hand. No, it could not be. It was just a coincidence. But the intuition of a wife and a mother told her otherwise. All the pieces suddenly fit together, frighteningly. The meeting at the park, the sad music, the scar, Adam's evasiveness. None of it was random. It was destiny. The next day, Elena returned to Adam's shop. This time, she did not bring her wallet, but an old violin case. It was David's violin. She had not opened it since the day he died. Adam was there, tuning a guitar. He was surprised to see her. Elena said nothing. She quietly placed the violin case on the counter and opened it. The maple violin lay there, silent and covered in a thin layer of dust. The familiar scent of wood wafted up to her nose, almost suffocating her. She lifted the violin, placed the bow on the strings, and began to play. Massenet's Meditation, the piece David used to play for her. But the notes that came out were terrible. They were out of tune, shaky, and full of mistakes. The bow in her hand felt like 1,000 pounds. Each note was a choked sob, a mournful lament for a great loss. She was not playing music, she was pouring out her pain. News of the Perfect Pitch AI project's failure spread through the glass hallways of Melodia Tech like an electrical short. The AI could create technically perfect music, but it was soulless, lacking the cracks Adam had mentioned. Users could not connect with it. The company's stock began to plummet, and Elena's position as CEO was in serious jeopardy. On the board, a new star was rising, Mark Peterson, a young, intelligent, and ambitious guy, a data science graduate with a brilliant degree from MIT. For Mark, emotions were a nuisance variable, a bug in the system that needed to be eliminated. He believed the future of Melodia Tech lay in cold data, in flawless algorithms, not in the vague soul that Elena always championed. Mark saw Elena as a relic of the past. He began to look for her weaknesses. He hired a private investigator. Before long, he had what he needed: candid photos of Elena and Leo with Adam, a billionaire female CEO spending time with an anonymous luthier. To Mark, this was her fatal flaw, evidence that Elena had let personal feelings affect her business judgment. Elena sensed the danger. She saw the scrutinizing looks in meetings and heard the whispers behind her back. She knew Mark was preparing to attack. The board of directors had scheduled an unscheduled meeting to reevaluate the company's direction, a euphemism for her ouster. Instead of playing by Mark's rules, with numbers and charts, Elena decided to create a new game. One evening, she sat alone in her office, in front of a computer screen with a 100-slide presentation full of complex data. She looked at it for a long time, then decisively moved the mouse cursor to the trash can icon. She began to create a video. Her source material was not market reports, but moments she had recorded on her phone over the past few weeks. The film was not perfect. The images were sometimes shaky, and the sound was sometimes distorted, but it was full of life. It was a scene of Adam patiently sitting by the lake, playing disjointed harmonica notes, and Leo, for the first time, trying to play his own harmonica. It was a scene of Leo, in Adam's shop, timidly holding a small violin, a replica of his father's, and drawing a first note after more than a year. The note was shrill and terribly off-key, but it was the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. And the most precious moment, Leo's first smile when he created a chaotic melody from bongo drums and a ukulele. That was her weapon, not data, but the truth. The boardroom was as tense as a guitar string about to snap. Mark stood at the podium, confident and sharp. He presented alarming numbers and declining charts, painting a bleak picture of the company's future under Elena's leadership. "We need a leader based on data, not emotion," Mark concluded. Then he delivered the final blow. A large photo was projected onto the screen. It was a candid shot of Elena, Adam, and Leo, laughing happily in the park. "This is Mr. Adam Miller," Mark said, his voice full of contempt. "A luthier. This is where our CEO is spending her time while the company is sinking. I ask the board of directors, is a person who allows inappropriate personal relationships to distract her still competent to lead a multi-billion-dollar tech corporation? The room buzzed with murmurs. All eyes turned to Elena, expecting her to crumble. But Elena remained calm. She walked to the podium, her posture poised and proud. "Mark is right," she began, surprising the entire room. "I have been spending time with Adam, and it was the wisest decision I have ever made." She did not look at Mark, but directly at the board members, the people she had worked with for many years. "You all know my story. You know I lost David, and my son, Leo, lost his voice. Perfect Pitch AI was my attempt to create a perfect world, a world without pain, without flaws. But I was wrong, because it is in the flaws, in the cracks, that we find our humanity." She gestured, and the video began to play. The entire room fell silent. They saw a boy go from being mute to uttering his first sound. They saw the healing power of an imperfect melody. They saw the smile of a child who seemed to have lost his joy forever. When the film ended, no one could deny the power of those moments. Many in the room, even the most hard-nosed investors, had to wipe away tears. "This," Elena said, her voice sharp with passion, "this is the future of Melodia Tech, not creating soulless, perfect products, but creating technology that helps people connect and helps heal broken souls. I declare a new direction for the company, Melodia Reborn, a project that will focus on connection and healing through music." Silence filled the room. The game had turned. And then, Elena made her final move. "To lead this project, I would like to introduce our new creative advisor." The boardroom door opened. Adam walked in. He looked completely out of place among the luxurious Armani suits. He was still wearing his familiar shirt and jeans, but the authenticity in his eyes had an incredible power. He did not use slides or data. He just stood there and told his story. He spoke of how he was once a musician, but had given it all up after a tragedy. He talked about the guilt that had kept him silent for many years. "Technology should not be something that erases our cracks," Adam said, his voice echoing through the room. "It should be a tool that helps us listen to the melodies that come from those very cracks. It should help us heal, not hide. Melodia Reborn will do that. We will help people find their own symphony, no matter how imperfect it may be." His sincerity shattered the atmosphere of doubt. When he finished, an elderly board member, Mrs. Chen, who had always supported Elena, was the first to stand and applaud. Then another and another. Soon, the entire room was filled with applause. Mark stood frozen, his face pale. He had lost. He had used data to attack, but Elena and Adam had countered with something much stronger, the truth of the heart. The game was over. Adam stood silently, listening to her broken melody. He said nothing. When she was almost unable to continue, he quietly picked up his old guitar, and he began to accompany her. He did not try to correct her wrong notes. He did not try to lead the melody. He was simply there, using his gentle, empathetic chords to create a cushion for her pain. He wove his notes into the blank spaces, the silent pauses in Elena's music. Their duet was a strange fusion of two wounded souls, two melodies sharing a common loss. Elena's mournful violin and Adam's warm guitar intertwined, comforting each other in the quiet space of the shop. When Elena's last note faded into the air, she put the violin down, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked directly into Adam's eyes, her own filled with an unspoken question. Adam looked back at her, his eyes full of torment and regret. He took a deep breath and said a single, heavy phrase. "I tried." 3 words. Just 3 words, but they were a confession for everything. He was the anonymous bystander. He was there. He witnessed it all. He tried to save David. The bond between them was no longer simple gratitude. It had become a thread of destiny, woven from tragedy, guilt, and broken melodies. And Elena understood that her and Leo's healing journey, in some way, could not continue without this man. The Melodia Reborn project was a resounding success. It was not just an application but a movement. Millions of people around the world used it to connect, to share their own imperfect music, to find solace in the melodies of others. It not only brought in huge profits, but also received acclaim from critics and the public. Melodia Tech had found its soul. Mark quietly submitted his resignation on a Monday morning. The scene shifts to a cozy house in the suburbs, where warm afternoon sunlight streams through the windows. The space is filled with sound. There is no more heavy, oppressive silence. In the living room, Leo is playing the first notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on his small violin. The notes are still wobbly, but the boy's eyes are bright with pride. Adam sits on the floor, patiently helping Leo adjust his fingers on the strings. And Elena, the powerful CEO of yesterday, is now sitting on a rug, joyfully tapping a pair of bongo drums, even when she is off beat. She looks at the three of them, and a deep sense of peace spreads through her chest. Two broken families were not just put back together, they had truly blended, forming a new, more complete picture. That evening, after Leo was asleep, Elena and Adam sat on the balcony, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. "I used to fight with silence," Elena shared, her voice pensive. "I saw it as an enemy, a blank space that had to be filled at all costs. But now, I understand that silence has its own language." Adam gently wrapped his arms around her. His warmth was so stable and safe. "Silence is not always empty, Elena. Sometimes it is where the most authentic melodies are created. I was silent for many years because I felt guilty. I thought I no longer deserved to make sound." He tightened his grip on her hand. "But it was by confronting our own broken notes, mine and yours, that we found each other." They did not need to say anything more. The understanding between them had transcended words. A brilliant Sunday morning, the family is once again playing music together in the living room. Leo plays the violin, much more confidently now. Adam accompanies him on the guitar, his chords gentle and supportive. Elena remains faithful to her bongos. Their symphony is not perfect. There are wrong notes. They sometimes fall out of sync, but the entire room is filled with laughter. Leo's laughter, clear and crisp, is the most beautiful sound. The camera slows down, capturing this moment of simple happiness. It captures Elena's smile, a smile that is no longer calculated, but comes from the bottom of her heart. It captures Adam's affectionate gaze as he looks at her. It captures the image of a family built from broken pieces, creating their own symphony together. An imperfect symphony, but because of that, it is truly perfect.